When DJI released the Osmo Pocket 3, it basically sold out everywhere. Everyone from vloggers to filmmakers to content creators wanted to get their hands on this camera, and honestly, once I shot with it, I wanted one myself. I mean, it is so easy to get incredible looking footage out of this tiny little camera, but out of the box, it does need to be set up a little bit. So in this video, we're going to go through the menus and what you should change to get the most out of your Osmo Pocket 3. Now, the first thing we're going to want to set up is the resolution and frame rate. To do so, swipe up from the bottom and make sure you're shooting 4K resolution. And for frame rate, if you live in North America, you're going to want to shoot either 24, 30, 48, or 60 frames. Personally, I like to shoot 24 frames for normal speed and 60 frames if I'm going to slow it down in post for high speed. And if you live in Europe, you're going to want to set this to either 50 frames for high speed or 25 frames for normal speed. And once we have this set, just swipe down to dismiss this box and then swipe in from the right. And this is going to bring up the image controls. And then in the upper right-hand corner, just choose Pro mode to get into a mode where we can manually adjust the exposure, white balance, color, the sharpness, the noise reduction, all of the stuff that you're gonna wanna be able to control to get the very best image. And let's start off with exposure here. And I have found that if you don't have an ND filter, auto exposure is pretty good on this camera, but you're gonna wanna change the ISO range on the right. I like 50 ISO up to 400. So this just means that the Osmo Pocket 3 can't go above 400 ISO, which is going to keep that noise pretty manageable. And then on the left-hand side, you can change your exposure value. And I've found that the Osmo Pocket 3 does overexpose by just a bit. So changing this exposure value to -0.3 is going to save those highlights. Now, if you do have an ND filter, I would highly recommend checking out the manual mode. This just means that you can change your shutter speed and your ISO independently to make sure that whatever your shutter speed is should be double your frame rate. So right here, we're shooting 24 frames. So we have a shutter speed of 1/50. If I'm shooting 60 frames, I'm gonna wanna change my shutter speed to 1/120 and so on and so forth. But a little caveat for this is because you can only go as low as 50 ISO, if you walk outside and you don't have an ND filter, you are going to overexpose this image. So in that case, make sure you have it set to auto. Next, we're gonna wanna change the white balance. Personally, I have it set to manual. I like to manually adjust the white balance based on whatever situation I'm in. But if you are in a situation where you have mixed light or you're going from indoor to outdoor, the auto white balance feature can be quite good. But in whatever case, like if I know I'm just shooting outside or I'm just shooting inside or I'm in controlled lighting, manual white balance is definitely the way to go. The glamour effect, I don't really know what this is, but I just keep it off and don't worry about that. Color-wise, you have 3 different settings. You can do normal, you can do HLG, or you could do D-Log-M. D-Log-M is DJI's more forgiving color profile. So this is what they put in their more consumer drones like the Mini 4 Pro. This is what you're gonna find in their action cameras like the Action 5. And if you've never graded log, D-Log-M is a fairly forgiving log profile and a pretty easy one to grade. So I highly recommend shooting in D-Log-M. It's gonna give you the most amount of dynamic range and the most flexibility in post. Next, we have the focus mode. Typically, I'm gonna shoot in continuous focus, but there are a few different scenarios where single point autofocus might be good. And what this is gonna just do is you set your focus and regardless of what happens in the frame, it's not gonna change focus, which depending on how you're shooting or the scene or anything, it could be helpful. But for the most part, continuous focus is how I typically shoot. And then last, we have our image adjustment. I have found the image to be slightly too sharp. So I have a sharpness of -1. You can go as low as -2 and as high as +2. And I would recommend you just messing around with these settings. For myself personally, I found -1 sharpness, -1 noise reduction to give me the best looking image. Now, once we have these kind of all set, we're gonna wanna save these to custom profiles. So swiping down from the top and in the upper left here, this is where you can save a custom profile. So just hit C1 and confirm this. And what this is going to do is save your white balance, your exposure, your sharpness, all your settings are now going to be saved. And now we can just set up a few different profiles. So we can go to 4K 60, and this is how I would shoot high speed. And we'll save this as custom 2. And then to get in a kind of a social format, you can, always turn your screen like this and shoot in a vertical format. But for myself personally, what I like to do is in the upper right, change this to 1:1, which is going to be using the most height and width that this sensor can capture, and just change it to 3K 24. This is going to be kind of my social settings. So instead of shooting a 16:9 vertical, now we're shooting 1:1. So I have the same amount of height as shooting 16:9, but a little more width. So in case I want a 9:16 and a 16:9 from the same frame, this is going to allow me to do that. And we're just going to save this as custom 3. So now in the bottom left, if we tap this, we can hot change between 4K 24 for our cinematic regular speed, 4K 60 for shooting some high speed, and then we have a 3K 24, which is going to be our social. Once we have these all set, you're going to want to go through and set up everything for all of the other profiles. So I'm going to run through those real quick, starting with panorama mode. Panorama mode, I have it set to do a 3:3, and if we swipe in from the right, I have it set to pro mode, exposure auto, white balance auto, and the one thing you're going to want to make sure you change is the photo format from JPEG, and just make sure you're shooting RAW. And I have the exposure set as auto because in photo mode, I'm not as worried about the shutter speed. You can have pretty much as fast a shutter as you want, and it's not going to affect the image. Next, we're going to switch to photo mode. And again, by default, this is going to be set to 16:9. So it's going to be taking just a center crop of the 1:1 sensor. So we're going to change this to 1:1, and that's just going to give you the most amount of sensor real estate. And then if we swipe in from the right, exposure auto, white balance auto, and make sure your format is set from JPEG to JPEG plus RAW. So you do get that JPEG image, but you're also getting a DNG RAW if you want to edit later in Lightroom or Capture One or whatever program you prefer. Next, we already set up video. We're gonna go to low light. And low light's a bit of a weird one. You can only shoot in 4K 24, 25, and 30. And in this mode, what DJI is doing is active noise reduction. So if we swipe in from the right here, you're gonna see that there is a pro mode. You can set the exposure manually, you can set your white balance, and you can set your focus, but you don't have a profile. So this is going to be shooting Rec 709. There's no way to shoot a 10-bit log image because it is doing that active noise reduction. But because it is doing active noise reduction, in the exposure, I do have this set to 50 to 16,000 ISO, and I don't mind it going as high as 16,000 ISO in just this mode because of that noise reduction. It does do a pretty good job of producing a clean image. And then next we have slow motion, and this is also a bit of an odd one. So if this is set to 4K 120, and if we swipe in from the right, we get pro mode. You can do auto exposure, auto white balance. You can have your manually white balance, auto white balance. You can set your focus mode, and you do get your 3 different color profiles: normal, HLG, and D-Log M, all 10-bit. But the weird part is if you would switch this to 1080p and try to shoot 240 and swipe in from the right, you're now locked into a Rec 709 10-bit image. So you can no longer adjust the color profile. And for that reason, I don't typically shoot 1080 240. I prefer to shoot 4K 120 because you can get that D-Log M color profile. Then lastly, we have the hyperlapse mode. This isn't really a mode that I use often, but I do have it set up just in case I need to. And to the right, we have Pro mode, auto exposure, auto white balance, continuous focus, and our -1 and 1 here in the image adjustment. And that's pretty much going to do it. These are all the settings I would change to get the very best out of the Osmo Pocket 3. If you have any questions regarding the settings or just the Osmo Pocket itself, leave those in a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another one.